Immediately after biological life leaves the human body, a complex and multifaceted process of transformation begins. The body, deprived of oxygen and nutrients, rapidly changes its chemical and physical composition. This is a natural and inevitable phenomenon. One of the key factors in this process is the activation of microbial flora, especially bacteria living within the intestines, which begin vigorously decomposing tissue. For Maria, a death microbiologist working in the pathology lab, every autopsy reveals a chain of biochemical reactions that lead to the formation of numerous gases. When the heart stops beating, immunity declines sharply, and protective barriers weaken. This allows microbes such as Clostridium, Escherichia coli, and Bacteroides to multiply unchecked and break down the body's organic matter. The activity of these bacteria results in the breakdown of proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates, accompanied by the release of ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, methane, and carbon dioxide. These gases not only accumulate, but also alter internal pressure and tissue structure. Released in a confined space, gas bubbles tense the skin, creating a distended effect, particularly in the abdominal cavity and chest. This can be compared to an internal inflatable bladder that compresses the surrounding tissue. This effect is most pronounced inside the coffin, where the dense wooden or metal ceiling and walls create a nearly airtight chamber. There, the increased pressure cannot escape, eventually leading to deformation and even rupture of the structure. At such moments, phenomena commonly known as coffin explosions can be observed, but their nature is far more prosaic and profound. Maria notes that the rate of the process and the volume of gases released depend on many factors: ambient temperature, humidity, the type of microbial activity, and the degree of preparation of the body for burial. If the body has not been embalmed, bacteria have maximum space and conditions for active growth, which significantly increases gas production. Interestingly, the nature of the gases emitted is closely linked to the body's microbiota and the specific diet of the individual during life. Bacteria of the genus Clostridium are anaerobic, meaning they live without oxygen, and produce significant amounts of hydrogen sulfide. This gas is responsible for the characteristic rotten smell and can be toxic to living organisms. This gas is especially dangerous when it accumulates in confined spaces, as it can lead to suffocation or intoxication. During the process of body decomposition, enzymatic tissue degradation also occurs, where enzymes independently destroy cell membranes, releasing additional nutrients for bacteria. This creates a kind of self-sustaining chain of decay and gas formation. The greater the enzymatic activity, the greater the pressure rises. Cell membranes begin to disintegrate, leading to fluid leakage, another aspect of internal coffin pressure. These fluids can penetrate the pores of wood or metal joints, causing further chemical reactions and damage. Sometimes the accumulation of moisture and pressure causes characteristic cracks and leaks in the lid or walls of the coffin. Gas pressure can reach several atmospheric pressures, especially if the air temperature is high and the soil is moist. Warmth and dampness promote increased microbial activity, so the process accelerates significantly in the summer, with the consequences becoming noticeable after just a few months. Marina, a forensic engineer, recounts cases where, 6 months after the funeral, the coffin lid literally exploded, releasing gases and liquids. The type of burial container is particularly important. Wooden coffins, despite their apparent density, contain numerous micropores through which some gases slowly evaporate. This reduces the risk of dangerous pressure buildup. Metal or hermetically sealed coffins, on the other hand, prevent gases from escaping, turning them into true high-pressure chambers, where the minimal interior space increases the risk of structural damage. The occlusion of the space is increased several-fold if the body is placed in a plastic or polyethylene bag inside the coffin. Such measures are often taken during infectious diseases to protect others from contact with pathogens. However, this hinders the escape of gases and increases the pressure, increasing the risk of rupture. When examining such cases, pathologists always focus on the interaction of biological factors and the physical constraints of space. Decomposition itself is a complex balance of chemical processes and microorganisms easily disrupted in a sealed environment. Understanding these processes helps specialists not only prevent unpleasant consequences, but also gain a deeper understanding of the biological nature of death. Thus, the body after death cannot be thought of as an immobile object. It is a living biological entity, even in the absence of life, that continues to actively change its structure and composition. Gas formation is only one of many aspects of this transformation, but it is precisely this that creates the effect of external pressure and even visible damage to the body's box. The pressure gradually builds, the skin becomes dense and glossy, resembling an inflated balloon, and the internal organs expand, creating a visual explosion effect. For those unfamiliar with the biochemistry of decomposition, such phenomena may seem mystical or frightening. In reality, what we see is a demonstration of the laws of biology and physics in action. Understanding the microbiological processes of decay and associated gas formation is the key to solving many mysteries surrounding burial explosions. By studying bacterial activity and their response to the environment, we can minimize risks and scientifically explain what happens underground after the coffin lid is closed. But while this process is becoming more or less clear, questions still remain about how to control and prevent such events, and what to do about the consequences if the pressure inside the coffin reaches a critical point. We'll examine these in the next section, which will detail the effects of storage conditions and methods for preventing such explosions. The tightness of coffins and the reasons for their rupture underground. Metal and hermetically sealed coffins have long ceased to be simply a means of burial. In an effort to ensure the body's preservation, many choose coffins that can be tightly sealed and insulated from the inside. It would seem that hermetically sealed coffins should guarantee that the body will not come into contact with the outside environment, odors will not spread, and the undecomposed remains will remain pristine. However, during decomposition, things play out quite differently. Instead of peace inside the coffin, a real conflict develops between the accumulation of gases and pressure, which cannot find a way out. The interior of a metal coffin is a closed ecosystem, where all decomposition products are trapped. Pathologists' adrenaline sometimes surges when they recount cases where the lid literally buckled, trying to squeeze itself out of the frame. It may seem like a small space, but over the course of several months, bacteria can generate enough gases to create several atmospheres of pressure inside. Imagine this pressure trying to find even the slightest release, but it has nowhere to go. The lid is in place, the seals are tight, and the metal doesn't deform easily. The consequences are obvious. The coffin body begins to experience significant stress, which could lead to ruptures and deformations. The secret to the problem lies in the nature of the microorganisms, which begin to multiply uncontrollably, destroying organic tissue. In wooden coffins, at least some of the gas can escape through the wood's pores, but hermetically sealed containers tightly seal any cracks and crevices. Sometimes the pressure is so great that the tightly sealed lid bulges upward, as if a firecracker is about to explode from within. It is not difficult to imagine that if the space in the lid is limited and the gas has a pronounced tendency to expand, the resulting internal force and pressure threatens to literally destroy the coffin into pieces. Pathologists like Dr. Elena Karpova have encountered unusual cases on numerous occasions. She recounts how, during one forensic examination, a metal coffin was so bulged that it appeared to have exploded from the inside. Meanwhile, the morgue was surprisingly quiet until the lid was opened. Due to the sealed coffin and poor handling, methane and hydrogen sulfide had accumulated, and when the lid was removed, a sharp release of gases and odor occurred. This phenomenon not only caused difficulties in conducting the examination, but also became a reason to think about proper ventilation of the coffins. In some countries, such as the United States and South Korea, metal coffins with hermetically sealed caskets are particularly popular. Manufacturers often promise complete preservation of the body, preventing decomposition and moisture penetration. However, in practice, the opposite is true. Decomposition gases have no escape and accumulate in enormous quantities. The pressure in the enclosed space begins to act as an internal explosion. This phenomenon is known as a coffin explosion. Sometimes the lid literally snaps off, liquid leaks out through the locks, and this becomes a real problem for cemetery services. The situation is exacerbated by high temperatures and humidity. The worst cases occur when the body has not been embalmed and the coffin is completely sealed and made of metal. Some cases described in foreign forensic reports occurred in winter in southern regions, where humidity reaches its highest levels. Decomposition gases such as methane, carbon dioxide, and hydrogen sulfide begin to accumulate with renewed vigor. Not only do they poison the air in the immediate vicinity, but they also create pressure strong enough to deform the doors and lids of crypts. Considering the internal design of coffins, the body is often placed inside a sealed plastic bag. This measure is taken for sanitary reasons, especially if the deceased was infected. However, preventing gases from escaping inside the plastic bag only increases the pressure. Surprisingly, even several days after the coffin is sealed, active gas emissions begin. These gases accumulate within the bag, eventually exerting pressure on the walls of the sealed chamber. It is important to know that even in a morgue setting where constant cooling is provided, problems can arise if the conditions are not met. Cases of coffin explosions aren't limited to morgues or cemeteries. Such phenomena are perhaps most notorious in graves flooded by silt or water. In China, after a massive flood, metal coffins began floating in a cemetery. The post-flood environment triggered rapid rotting, accompanied by increased gas production, and the pressure inside the coffins reached levels sufficient to break the ground and lift the lids. Thus, the sealed coffins themselves become a kind of trap, where the forces of nature unleash their destructive power. This process lasts from several weeks to months, but when the gas pressure reaches critical levels, the coffin begins to act as an explosion trap. The denser and more airtight the material, the higher the likelihood of this occurring. There have been cases where coffin lids in grave niches, especially wooden ones with metal inserts, have warped so much that they have caused serious inconvenience to cemetery administrators and staff. Sometimes, emergency repairs or complete replacement of the structure have been necessary. An important aspect is the toxicity of the gases emitted. Among them is hydrogen sulfide, which smells like rotten eggs and is a highly toxic gas. Ammonia and methane also form and accumulate in high concentrations. These substances can create hazardous conditions around the grave and in the enclosed spaces where the coffin is located. In morgues without proper ventilation, this condition increases the risk of poisoning for staff and causes serious discomfort for people. Methane, in turn, is an explosive gas that, under certain conditions, can cause a real explosion, especially if there is a spark source. Several practical solutions exist to reduce the risk of such incidents. Experience shows that completely preventing decomposition is impossible, but controlling gas formation is possible. Embalming, which involves treating the body with preservative fluids, is considered a reliable method. This reduces bacterial activity and minimizes gas production. Furthermore, modern coffins with ventilation valves allow accumulated gases to escape without damaging the structure. Some cemeteries and morgues use non-hermetic wooden coffins, which, while not perfectly sealed, allow gases to escape. This prevents internal pressure buildup and reduces the risk of structural rupture. Furthermore, the lower temperatures in crypts and freezers delay or even completely halt the decay process. Physical parameters such as soil moisture and temperature play a crucial role. If the soil is dry and air circulates freely, decomposition slows down. Conversely, moisture accelerates microbial activity, increasing tissue deterioration. Regarding temperature, the warmer the environment, the faster the microbial metabolism, and consequently, the faster the gas release. Cemetery workers like Mikhail from one large city share that monitoring coffins after burial is an important safety measure. Sometimes they notice unnatural bulges in the lids or the appearance of liquid around the graves. These signs indicate a buildup of internal pressure. In such cases, additional ventilation measures or coffin inspections are implemented to prevent damage and health risks. All these processes force us to look at the taboo subject of death in all cultures from a different perspective. Death is usually perceived as a silent end, but here it manifests itself in a far from quiet way. Inside a closed space, beneath the earth, a complex chemical and biological process occurs which can be noisy and even dangerous. Metal and hermetically sealed coffins become a kind of pressure capsule, and a new understanding of this phenomenon is important not only for science, but also for everyday life. But what happens after the internal pressure breaks the coffin? How does the environment change, and is there a real threat to people nearby? These questions are important, and will logically lead us to further discussion of the nature of these consequences and ways to minimize them in the next chapter. How to prevent internal pressure and coffin collapse. Preventing the buildup of internal pressure that could destroy a coffin is possible if you know and apply several effective methods. First and foremost, this involves embalming, treating the body with chemicals that inhibit bacterial activity and slow decomposition. Formaldehyde, glutaraldehyde, and other preservatives penetrate the tissue, killing microorganisms and preventing excess gas formation. Embalming allows gases to escape much more slowly, and the pressure inside the coffin remains within safe limits. Funeral services in Georgia, a city in the United States, reported that after the widespread use of embalming began, coffin explosions dropped sharply. The next method is to ensure ventilation and gas evacuation from the coffin. Modern manufacturers have increasingly incorporated special multi-layer gaskets and valves into their designs. Through these, gases from rotting coffins can slowly and silently escape. This approach is similar to an autoclave, but with the opposite effect. It reduces pressure rather than maintains it. In South Korea, in cities with hot and humid climates, this method has saved more than one funeral from disaster. In addition, ventilation holes sometimes enhance the coffin's ability to breathe and maintain an optimal microclimate inside. The coffin material plays a crucial role in pressure control. Simple wooden coffins don't create a sealed environment and allow gases to gradually escape. In contrast, sealed metal coffin containers often act as high-pressure capsules. In Russia, where wooden coffins are traditionally used, explosions are much less common. Pathologists' experience shows that choosing the right material reduces the risk of sudden structural failure and preserves buried remains in a more natural state. Another important measure is humidity control at the burial site. Waterlogged soil accelerates decomposition and slows gas evaporation, leading to pressure buildup. Areas with high groundwater levels should be equipped with drainage systems, and more breathable coffins should be selected. For crypts and mausoleums, it is advisable to use ventilation systems that maintain the required microclimate and prevent the accumulation of hazardous gases. In New Orleans, for example, after drainage measures were carried out, the number of incidents involving the expansion of burial mounds decreased significantly. The temperature inside the burial is also important. Cold slows microbial metabolism and virtually stops gas formation. In regions with harsh winters, bodies decompose more slowly and the risk of explosion is minimized. Vaults with concrete walls and ventilation are kept cool, significantly reducing internal pressure. Some funeral homes use special refrigeration for sealed containers, preventing such problems even in warmer seasons. Interestingly, bodies killed by infections are often additionally sealed in airtight plastic bags. This measure is intended to prevent the spread of pathogens and protect others. However, if the bag is completely sealed and placed in an airtight container without ventilation, the pressure inside can increase sharply. Therefore, before placing the body in such a bag, it is necessary to ensure that gases can escape and the pressure is controlled. At one morgue in the southern United States, an investigation revealed that it was a tightly tied bag without ventilation that caused the metal shell to rupture. It's important to remember to properly position the coffin in the grave. Often, improper burial site preparation leads to improper load distribution and increased pressure due to air compression and moisture. Experts recommend studying soil conditions and choosing the depth and size of the grave based on climatic factors. Modern funeral companies recommend ordering coffins with built-in ventilation and choosing more porous materials for those who prefer natural decomposition. All of these methods combined can significantly minimize the risk of coffin collapse underground. However, it's important to remember that the decomposition process is complex and unpredictable, depending on numerous factors, from temperature and humidity to the composition of the microflora. Experienced forensic experts say that even with ideal precautions, in rare cases, the internal pressure can become excessively high, especially if the coffin is placed in an area with abnormal humidity and temperature fluctuations. In any case, modern knowledge and technology have made this phenomenon much more manageable. The use of preservatives has become commonplace, coffin design has improved significantly, and an understanding of the biology of the process has helped develop preventative measures. Imagine that even the darkest side of life, like death, can be studied and controlled through science and engineering. Advocates of traditional funeral rites are not always receptive to innovations, considering them an interference with the natural process. However, experience shows that avoiding unpleasant and dangerous coffin explosions brings not only peace to the deceased, but also safety to loved ones and the surrounding community. There have been cases where the destruction of a coffin in a crypt has led to massive sanitary accidents. This problem too has been prevented, thanks to the methods described above. A prime example is the Larson family, who encountered this problem several years ago. Their relative was buried in an untreated, sealed metal coffin. 8 months later, the lid bulged and cracked loudly. They then consulted a local embalming specialist who recommended embalming and ventilation. The family now follows these recommendations, and such incidents have not occurred since. Professor of biochemistry Olga Kravtsova, who studies microbiological processes in cadavers, emphasizes knowledge of decomposition gases and their behavior in enclosed spaces was a turning point. Previously, no one could explain why such sudden coffin failures occurred. Today, we understand that these phenomena can be predicted and prevented. Her work has inspired many specialists around the world to implement new standards for coffin manufacturing and installation. The next aspect is the psychological comfort of relatives. Knowing that modern methods are in place to prevent unpleasant surprises inside the graves, relatives feel calm and confident. This emotional calm is an essential component of a dignified farewell and remembrance. Mourning becomes less stressful as fears of possible explosions subside. Of course, the complete elimination of risk cannot be ruled out, but with a modern approach, the likelihood of such an incident is reduced to isolated cases. Advances in materials science, burial hygiene, and preservation chemistry provide a powerful tool in the fight against decomposition, which could otherwise lead to destruction. After all, death is also a part of nature, but nature demands respect and understanding, not fear. In summary, it can be noted that understanding the biology of the process, technical innovations, and the correct choice of materials help address the problem of internal pressure in coffins. Body processing, ventilation, and the proper selection of the structure and burial site are not just empty words, but real steps towards a safe and dignified funeral. For funeral services, pathologists, and cemetery workers, this is an important area of development. Now that we know how to prevent coffin explosions, we can move on to the final, equally important aspect: how society perceives such phenomena and what myths continue to circulate around coffin explosions, generating fears and misconceptions. This is what we will dedicate the final section of our narrative to.